Chapter 6. Content Questions. 1. Business. Listen to a discussion in a business class. Fill in the diagram with the information that you hear.
Okay, everyone, when you think of a traditional large company, what comes to mind? A big office, perhaps? Lots of workers? What about managers? Well, some companies have lots of managers, lots and lots of managers. And when a company has many levels of management, that company is said to be a tall organization. And can anyone guess what the opposite of a tall management structure is?
I'd guess a short management structure.
Good guess, but no, it's a flat structure, but more on that later, okay? Back to the issue at hand, which is tall management structures. So, you might have the company president, that's one level, and then you might have a vice president, that's another level, and then you might have, general managers, and below them managers, and below them assistant managers, and then management trainees, and then who knows, you might have sub-assistant manager trainees in training. Okay, I'm making a joke here, but yeah, some companies have huge management structures called, we call them management hierarchies. There's a good reason for hierarchies, of course, and that is that when a company grows, when it gets really huge, well, you need to control the organization, so you need managers telling people what to do. But here's the problem. Significant problems arise when you have vast management hierarchies, the first of which is poor communication. In particular, the problem of what's known as distortion of commands. What do you suppose that is, John?
Same thing that happens here in class, I'd guess. I mean, you give us information in every class, but as you probably figured out, we don't always remember that information correctly on a test, right? I mean, we get things wrong even though you told us the answers here in class.
Good illustration. And yes, I certainly have figured that one out, John. So, yeah, basically what John's getting at is that people can interpret things differently than they're supposed to. Meaning can be lost through incorrect interpretation of a manager's words. So that's one problem. And there's another. If you have a tall management structure, it can take a long time for decisions and orders to pass through the levels. So let's say the company president gives an order to do something that will affect everyone in the company. Well, in a company with a tall structure, that order can take a long time to reach the actual workers. This makes companies slow to respond to change in the market. Finally, managers are expensive, very expensive. Managers have assistants, secretaries, bonuses, big salaries, you name it, they're expensive. You've all heard about companies that downsize, right? Lay off workers. Well, did you know that typically they try not to downsize the people actually making the products? Statistically, they downsize middle managers in companies that just have too many levels of management. And if you ask me, that's not altogether a bad thing. I mean, if a company is going to be effective in the global market, it can't have so many managerial levels.
1. Based on information from the discussion, indicate whether or not each statement is a disadvantage of a tall management structure. Place a check mark in the correct box. Two. Environmental science. Listen to a lecture in an environmental science class. Fill in the diagram with the information that you hear.
So, we've been discussing the diversity of plant and animal species found around the world, and we've also talked about how humans have benefited and continue to benefit from many of these species. The problem we face is how to make sure the diversity of plants and animals is preserved. After all, species are dying off. They are going extinct and disappearing every year. And as they disappear, we lose some of the diversity of species on our planet. We lose important biological resources. What I'd like to talk about now is how we as humans can manage these precious biological resources. The two methods we are going to talk about today both aim to preserve species so they don't become extinct, and each method aims to protect both plant and animal species. They just go about doing it in a different way, as you'll see from the examples. Now, traditionally, we've managed biological resources through institutions like zoos, botanical gardens, and aquariums, all of which are examples of what we call off-site management. Off-site management is when we take animals and plants out of nature and let them live in a special place where scientists and caretakers can watch over them and protect them. The other choice you have to preserve plants and animals is called on-site management. That's when you leave plants and animals in their natural environments, their habitats. This is important. The two choices for biological resource management are on-site management and off-site management. Clear so far? Good. Since it has been the most common throughout human history, let's start off by talking about off-site management of plants and animals. Usually, off-site management involves separating plants and animals that would otherwise be found together in nature. So, if you wanted to protect zebras, they would go to a zoo, whereas if you wanted to protect a species of grass that shares the same natural environment with zebras, the grass would be planted in a botanical garden. There is no attempt to preserve the natural environment in off-site management. The aim is to preserve the individual species. Because of this focus on individual species, zoos and botanical gardens can be places that protect species from extinction and even allow them to be put into new natural environments later. Now, on-site management, that's a whole different game. When you want to preserve biological resources in one place, you have a much harder job. First of all, where do you draw the lines? Well, that's where national parks come in. National parks are being created, as I speak, around the world to preserve biological resources in their natural environments, so those resources are not threatened by human distinction. Unlike zoos and botanical gardens, however, natural parks face difficulties in terms of their size. How big do you make it to protect everything in them? One problem is when animals leave the park and get killed by hunters. This doesn't happen in zoos. On the other hand, by making a park, you protect a larger number of species all at once. You protect them as they live together. You protect the entire natural environment, and that means even preserving biological resources we haven't yet discovered.
1. Based on information from the lecture, to which biological resource management type does each example relate? Place a check mark in the correct box. Three. Office hours. Listen to a conversation between a student and a professor. Fill in the diagram with the information that you hear.
Hi there, Professor Martin. Do you have a minute?
Sure, Jane. How's everything going?
Good. I read that article you suggested on waterway restoration. It was really interesting. I think that the work those environmental scientists are doing to clean up polluted streams and rivers is very impressive and needed. I just had no idea they had the technology to remove so many chemical contaminants.
Oh, glad you enjoyed it. The river project that article talked about uses cutting-edge technology. It's all still very new, but I think a lot of people will be adopting that technology in the coming years to clean up other waterways.
You know how, the other day in class you were talking about how students should try and get some hands-on experience if they want to go into the environmental science field?
Yes, I always encourage my students to do that. I can't overemphasize the value of practical experience for any future career, be it in environmental science or some other field.
Well, I think you convinced me to give it a try. The thing is, how do I, actually get hands-on experience? It's not like environmental companies and organizations are willing to hire college sophomores.
Jane, one very easy way to get experience and also to meet some very interesting and dedicated people who care about the issues and are doing something about it is to join a local environmental group and volunteer to help with one of its projects. A lot of the local groups are always looking for volunteers. There is more work to do than there are people to do it. So, it would allow you an excellent opportunity to get good practical experience. There are a lot of groups, large and small, in our area that you could volunteer with. If waterway restoration is something that interests you, I could introduce you to a group that I know well. They are a nice bunch and would certainly appreciate the help.
It does interest me, and I really want to do something about cleaning up the river. But you see, I'm taking classes full-time and have a part-time job too. I'm really busy, and I'm not sure I have time for volunteering. That's why I was thinking of a paid job.
Let me suggest another option then. You could do an independent study project. You would work with a sponsor and design a project, and you could do the project while you volunteer with a local environmental organization. For example, you could help the organization test water samples and write an analysis about it.
That sounds great. Does that mean an independent study project would take the place of a regular class?
As long as you find a sponsor and get approval from the department, then yes. In that case, you could get credit for your project just as if you were taking a regular class.
Neat.
1. Based on information from the conversation, indicate whether or not each statement is correct. Place a check mark in the correct box. 4. Service encounter. Listen to a conversation between a student and a university employee. Fill in the diagram with the information that you hear.
Hi, I was wondering if you could help me. I'm having a lot of trouble balancing my classes and my job this semester. It's really tiring me out. And we still have 10 weeks to go. My friends all suggested I talk to you to get some advice.
Okay. Well, let's talk about your schedule and see if we can find a way to help you. To start, can you tell me a little more about your schedule this semester and why it is giving you trouble?
Sure. The thing is, I have to work. My scholarship ran out last term, and now I have to work to pay for tuition, rent, food, all that. I barely make enough money to survive. And I work a lot, at least 20 hours per week. Sometimes more. 20 hours is the minimum. Sometimes I have to work a lot more. Just depends on how busy the restaurant is. It's really hard, but I've got to do it.
So how about your classes?
Well, I'm taking 6 classes this term. I've scheduled them so that I can go to classes all day and then work every evening if I have to.
6 classes is a pretty heavy schedule for any student. And with work on top of that, it must be hard to find any time to study, or to get any sleep for that matter.
Tell me about it.
Do you need to take 6 classes?
Yeah. I have to take 6 classes if I'm going to graduate on time. I figured if I take 6 classes this term, and next term I can graduate on time. I really want to do it.
And how are your grades this term?
That's what worries me. I'm not doing so well. Before, I was a pretty above-average student. I went into the term with a 3.5 GPA, but now my grades are slipping.
You know what? It sounds to me that you might want to drop a few classes and accept that you won't graduate on time. If you are facing this much pressure this early in the term, you are risking your GPA, your job, and your health. Why don't you just take the 3 classes that are the most important to you and focus on doing well in them? You also said that you are in a tight financial situation. It would seem that keeping your job is a top priority. Without it, how can you continue to go to school?
Exactly, I can't.
So I suggest you drop at least 3 classes. Sometimes it is important to recognize that you can't have everything that you want. You have to choose the best option for you.
What you are saying makes a lot of sense. I just needed to hear it from someone else. Thanks for your help.
Certainly. And if you need to talk about anything else, you can always drop in.
1. Based on information from the conversation, indicate whether or not each statement is part of the student's problem. Place a check mark in the correct box. 5. Philosophy. Listen to a discussion in a philosophy class. Fill in the diagram with the information that you hear.
Okay, so today we're discussing positive skepticism. I'd like to spend some time talking about what it is, and more importantly, the influence of Michel de Montaigne on its development. First, imagine yourself living in a country that is being torn apart by bloody wars fought between opposing religious groups. You belong to one of these religious groups, but you see no point to the wars. All they bring is destruction. You have been educated to see that life can be, and indeed was once better for all humans. What do?
I'd have to leave my country and go live somewhere else.
Okay. Anything else?
I guess you could try to get the two sides to stop fighting, but that would be really tough.
Good. So you can see a little of what kind of decision Michel de Montaigne was facing when his home country was being devastated by religious wars between Protestants and Catholics during the 16th century. Montaigne was a Catholic, but he had no desire to take sides, so he left his job as a lawyer in the city and withdrew to live quietly in the country. You see, Montaigne was educated to value human dignity and believe education could help people improve morally. The world he saw around him was the opposite, so he decided to investigate why this was so. His investigations and writings inspired an intellectual trend known as positive skepticism, a new approach for criticizing the harmful effects of tradition and authority.
Wait, how could he investigate the social problems of his time if he fled to the countryside? It's not like they had TV and internet back then.
And even if they did, Montaigne would not have trusted them. You see, he felt that all he really could know was himself, and so he began his investigation by rigorously questioning himself and everything he thought he knew and answered the questions honestly. This prepared him to ask serious critical questions about society. His method influenced positive skepticism in 3 ways. One was that he found that extreme positions in politics and religion were dangerous but appealing to many people. Why? Because they were easier than doing the hard work of thinking carefully. It is much harder to understand the complexities of the world and to live with them. So Montaigne criticized these extreme positions. That brings us to his second contribution, and that was to promote moderation and tolerance. If more people shared Montaigne's view and refused to give in to the extremes, then 16th century Europe may have been a much more prosperous and less bloody place. Finally, he rejected absolute positions, especially in terms of religious truths and morality, even though he was a religious man. This was an extremely important contribution since the wars of his time were fueled by religion and hatred of other religious groups. The most extreme believers could not talk to one another to solve their differences because each side was convinced that it was absolutely 100% correct and the other side was 100% wrong. These methods of critical thinking are still with us today and have inspired many writers to be skeptical of tradition and authority in their own times.
1. Based on information from the discussion, indicate whether or not Montaigne accomplished each task before beginning his investigations. Place a check mark in the correct box. Six. Sociology. Listen to a lecture in a sociology class. Fill in the diagram with the information that you hear.
When we talk about the largest form of social organization, we are talking about the concept of society. Society refers to a semi-closed system made up of individuals. However, it is a collective that is larger than any of the individuals. Humans have developed a remarkable array of different forms of social organization. Yet sociologists have identified a few key types of societies. Types that share defining general features common to certain specific societies. I'd like to talk about 3 types today, just to give you a look at the considerable diversity of human societies. And one way to differentiate types of societies is to look at 3 dimensions. There may be some new words for you, so pay attention. The first thing we look at in categorizing a society is its level of mobility. In other words, do its members live in one place or do they move around? Then we ask about how members meet their need for food. We call this their subsistence pattern. So, we ask what their subsistence pattern is. And a third thing we also ask is who does what job. This is what we call the division of labor. We ask what the division of labor for the society is. So, we compare mobility, subsistence patterns, and the division of labor. Let's start off at the beginning, with the very first human societies. The earliest humans developed a form of social organization that centered on movement. The key word here is movement. And what I mean by that is that the earliest human societies were highly mobile, moving from place to place in search of food, water, and shelter. Food was obtained exclusively through two means, hunting and gathering. This is why we call this type of society a hunter-gatherer society. If you are trying to get food by hunting animals and gathering plants, well, you have to keep moving. Animals won't stay around if you are trying to kill them. Similarly, if you are picking all the berries, roots, and edible leaves in an area, you will eventually run out. So that's what I mean by movement being so important. Now, the other thing is division of labor. In hunting and gathering societies, people don't really have specific jobs, so we say there is little division of labor. Sure, it's the men that do most of the hunting and the women that do most of the gathering. But when it comes to cooking, building shelters, caring for children, healing, making tools, all those other jobs are done by anybody and sometimes everybody. There are no specialized jobs in a hunting and gathering society. Clear so far? Okay, then on to the next type, horticultural societies. Well, at some point people got tired of moving around all the time and not always finding food. So someone discovered that he could collect the seeds for plants and plant them. People found a way to get greater control over their food supply by planting some food crops like wheat, corn, beans, etc. People still move around in a horticultural society, but not as much, and sometimes very little at all. They begin to settle down and spend more of their time raising animals and plants, but they are still going out hunting and gathering too, just not as much. There are other differences too. Unlike the egalitarian hunter-gatherer societies, horticultural societies have some division of labor. Some people are political or religious leaders who don't do as much of the work producing food as other people do. In some horticultural societies, there are a limited number of individuals who are healers or have other specialized jobs. Now, for our third type of society, we see a huge change. In this type, the agrarian society, people have settled down more or less permanently. That's not always the case with horticulturalists, who often move from time to time, or even seasonally in some cases, but in an agrarian society, people are settled down or sedentary. They produce all of their own food by growing it in permanent fields or by raising animals. Sure, some people might hunt, but the important thing is that agriculture is the dominant subsistence pattern. It is also in agrarian societies that we see significant divisions of labor, the rise of specialists who only do one job. For example, kings, warriors, doctors, priests, even teachers. Most people are farmers, though, in an agrarian society.
1. Based on information from the lecture, to which type of society does each feature relate? Place a check mark in the correct box. Seven. Office hours. Listen to a conversation between a student and a professor. Fill in the diagram with the information that you hear.
Hi, Professor Jordan, can I talk to you? My name is Sandra Lewis. I'm interested in taking your developmental psych class next term.
Yes, hi, Sandra. Come on in. Take a seat.
Thanks. So I just met with my advisor, and she tentatively signed me up for your class, but she said I would need to talk with you to get your approval and to ask you to sign a form. That's because I haven't taken Intro to Psych, And it said in the course catalog that the class was a prerequisite for your course.
Yes, that is correct. It is a departmental policy not to allow students to take middle and upper level courses without having first completed the necessary prerequisites. We do this because the courses above the introductory level courses presuppose that students have a certain amount of background knowledge. For instance, in developmental psychology, we start off assuming that you know all the theories and material covered in the Introduction to Psychology course, the 101 course. Without that background knowledge, it's hard to follow the course. So I'm afraid you'll have to take the 101 course first, and then you are more than welcome to be in my class next time I offer it. Which I think, will be this summer.
Oh no, that won't work. I'm not going to be here this summer, and I really want to take your class. See, I have an internship this summer at a camp, and will be working with disabled children, so I really want to take your class to help me be prepared for that experience. One of the supervisors at the camp, Jessica Franklin, graduated from here about 2 years ago, and she highly recommended that I take your class before starting my internship. She thought it would be very beneficial to have a foundation in the theory of developmental psychology to help guide my work.
Ah, I remember Jessica. Glad to hear she is working at the camp. I know that was something that she had hoped to do after graduating. Good for her. Tell her I said hello next time you talk with her.
Sure, be glad to.
But about your situation, I can understand where you are coming from, and it sounds like you could really benefit from the class. And it's great to hear that you are planning an internship this summer as well and want to apply the theories from the course toward your work. But without the background knowledge that you will need, I'm afraid the course will be too difficult for you.
Well, I know that I didn't take the 101 class here, but I have taken 2 years of psychology in high school, so I'm pretty familiar with the basic theories and concepts. I didn't take the AP test, but I still know a lot.
How about this? What I can do is let you take the class on a trial basis. I'll sign your form and you can be in the class, but I want you to check in with me on a weekly basis and let me know how you think things are going. Then we can decide if the course is right for you or not. I'd also suggest that you audit the 101 class while you are in my class. That means you'll be in 101, but you won't be responsible for all the work, and you won't get credit for it. But that way, at least, you'll be getting some exposure to how we teach introductory psychology at this college, and it might help you review what you learned in high school.
Professor Jordan, I really appreciate you doing this. I'm confident that it will work out. And of course, I'll keep you posted on how things are going.
Okay then. Where's that form you were telling me about?
Oh, right here. Thanks.
Just make sure you turn that in soon. They are pretty strict about deadlines around here.
Yeah, that's what I hear. My advisor keeps warning me about that. I'll drop it off right now. See you next term.
I'll see you then.
1. Based on information from the conversation, indicate whether or not the student must perform each action. Place a check mark in the correct box. Eight. Service encounter. Listen to a conversation between a student and a university employee. Fill in the diagram with the information that you hear.
Hi. Do you know where I can find the editor?
Yes, but she's not available right now. Can I help you with something?
Yeah, I'm a first-year journalism major, and I've been taking this class, Intro to Journalism, with Professor Woodward. He's a really cool guy, and the class is super interesting. So I was talking to him after class the other day, and I told him that I want to become a journalist. My goal is to write for the New York Times someday. Anyway, we were talking, and he said that I need to get some experience, build up a portfolio, you know. So he suggested that I try to write freelance for the school paper. I thought that sounded like a great idea, because, you know, I used to write for my school paper in high school, so that's why I'm here. You guys are the school newspaper, and I want to see if I can get a job with you.
Wait a minute. Slow down. Let me explain something. We do work with freelance writers, but we can't pay non-staffers.
Yeah, but if I write for the paper, staff, right? That's how it was in my high school, except we didn't really get paid, but this is college.
No, not exactly. That's not how it works here. The way it works is like this. Right now, the paper only has a budget for 5 paid positions. That's our entire staff, 5 people, and that includes the editors, writers, and a photographer. We're all part-time, but we manage somehow to get it all done. Anyone else who works for us, writing, taking pictures, drawing cartoons, does so freelance. And for the purposes of our budget, they are considered non-staffers. We can't pay them. I'm sorry, that's just how it is.
Oh, bummer. So much for that plan. I'm not sure what I'm going to do now.
Wait, don't get me wrong. We need freelance writers big time. I don't want to give you the wrong impression. I'm sure the editor would love to talk to you about working with us. She just needs to see some writing samples that show what you are capable of. Then, if she thinks you can handle it, she can get you started writing 1 or 2 articles a week.
Yeah, but I need a job. I need to earn some money. My parents are helping me out with tuition and housing, but I have to use my own money for books and clothes, CDs, going out, stuff like that.
I completely understand that. But why don't you give it a try, writing freelance for us? You can get some experience and build up your portfolio in the process. And most importantly, if you stick around for a while writing with us, there is bound to be a staff position that will open up. If you become staff, we can pay you. That's actually how I got hired. Sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Gina. I write most of the sports articles.
Cool. I've read your stuff. I'm Alex.
I started out writing freelance, first covering student government, and then I got into reporting on the budget. Ugh, that was not my thing. Yeah, it was tough at first, but I learned a lot. And then when one of the senior writers graduated, I got hired. And it just happened that he was the sports writer, and I love writing about sports. This is my last year. I love it. The job's part-time, but it's a great place to work. Sure I can't get you to reconsider?
Did you say you needed help with sports?
We'd love some help.
Right on.
Let's get you set up with an appointment to talk with Martha. How does Friday morning look for you?
Anytime before 11. I have class then.
Here, I'll leave her a note that you'll stop by at 10. Oh, and don't forget to bring some writing samples.
Will do.
1. Based on information from the conversation, indicate whether or not each statement is a reason the student gives for wanting to work for the school newspaper. Place a check mark in the correct box. (9) History. Listen to a lecture in a history class. Fill in the diagram with the information that you hear.
As the industrial era swept across America in the latter half of the 19th century, it created an enormous amount of wealth for a new generation of men who often had started from humble backgrounds only to acquire fabulous riches in their lifetime. Yet, at the same time, millions of Americans were suffering in horrible conditions of poverty in the rapidly growing industrial cities. Some intellectuals of that time were championing the rise of these ultra-wealthy leaders of industry. They would say that a man gets what he deserves in life. For instance, if he works hard and becomes rich, then that is what he deserves. His wealth is the product of his hard work. Conversely, if a man is lazy and lives in poverty, then that too is his own fault. Such thinkers believed that America was a land of endless riches. They also said that if a man became very wealthy, the government had no right to take his money in the form of taxes because he earned it and knows best how to spend it. But, you might say, don't governments need money to help the poor and those in need by providing public education, hospitals, sewers, and other things that everyone can use? One of the wealthiest men of the time, Andrew Carnegie, responded to such a question by promoting what he called the gospel of wealth. It stated, "The main ideas I have just laid out for you, that men get what they deserve, the government should let them get rich, and that they should be able to do what they want with their wealth." But he added something that others were not saying. Carnegie believed that a man with wealth was responsible to help others improve themselves and to demonstrate his commitment to help other men improve their conditions. He gave generously, creating a system of 2,800 public libraries. He died before he could spend all of his money, but carefully left it entrusted to an organization that continues to manage his money today and give to people in need. Carnegie believed that such great men of wealth could indeed eradicate poverty from America without government interference. Well, has the gospel of wealth lived up to the promises that Andrew Carnegie envisioned? Let's look at two criticisms before we decide. First, there is the problem of the ideas underlying the gospel of wealth. Carnegie did not reject the idea that some men could become incredibly wealthy and that this might be a problem. He was more concerned with what they did with their money. The problem is that not everyone can become rich, not in 19th century America or anywhere. People have different personalities and abilities. Some people are born with poor health and injuries, so that they must be cared for their entire life. Because the gospel of wealth continued to support the idea that people get what they deserve, it did not help face the real causes of problems facing American society at the end of the 19th century. Its narrow commitment to individualism obscured the realities many people faced. Second, while Andrew Carnegie accomplished great things through his philanthropy and set about to give away all his wealth, few others followed his path. For his gospel of wealth to truly have helped alleviate the suffering of so many during his time, it would have needed far more philanthropists to practice what Carnegie preached. That did not happen. It was a mistaken idea to think that if wealthy industrialists were allowed to pay less money to the government in the form of taxes, then they would give it away more effectively. It didn't happen. There was and still are excellent philanthropists, wealthy people that give their money to others in need. But the problem is there aren't enough of them. So governments tax people and, if they are at their best, should use that money to make sure that everyone benefits. There are a lot of things governments provide that aren't always recognized, but that improve the condition of all people, rich and poor alike. Without government programs, we would never have seen industrial cities cleaned up and made into healthier, safer places to live than they once were. Some would argue that these changes were more beneficial to most poor people than Carnegie's libraries, since these changes directly raised living standards.
1. Based on information from the lecture, indicate whether or not each idea is specific to Carnegie's gospel of wealth. Place a check mark in the correct box. (10) Astronomy. Listen to a discussion in an astronomy class. Fill in the diagram with the information that you hear.
We've been talking about the lunar landscape and lunar soil, and today I want to pose an interesting question to you, one that scientists are grappling with as we speak. Is there water on the moon? Or theoretically, could there be water on the moon? It would seem that, yes, water could be on the moon. We just haven't found it yet, especially since we've talked about how the moon likely shared a similar origin with Earth.
But how can there be water on the moon if there is no atmosphere and little gravity? Wouldn't any water that may have been on the moon have evaporated a long time ago?
Yes, Earth and the moon share similar origins, but scientists think that if there is water on the moon, it likely came from comets or meteors that contained ice and crashed into the moon. This is also a theory of how Earth got its water, but what you said is correct. Any water on the moon's surface would evaporate quickly. That's why scientists think any water on the moon would have to be in the form of ice, specifically underground ice deposits. These could be in the form of crystals or perhaps larger bodies of ice.
You mean like an underground ice lake or something?
Exactly. That's exactly what we are talking about. Possible frozen underground lakes. Now, if ice were on the moon, where would you start looking?
The poles. They are the coldest. That's where they are looking for water on Mars too, and it's where ice is found on Earth.
Right. You'd look for ice in the polar regions. Well, when investigating any theory, as you all know, scientists make the best guesses they can possibly make and then seek evidence to support or disprove their theory. Let's take a look at the evidence in support of there being ice on the moon. Now, scientists have been thinking about this problem since the 1960s, but it wasn't until 1996 when they got their first solid evidence. A spacecraft called Clementine was sent to investigate the lunar South Pole and sent back the first evidence of potential water. Its radar suggested that it had found deposits of water ice a few meters under the moon's surface. Then in March of 1998, a second spacecraft, Lunar Prospector, confirmed what Clementine had found. Even more, it confirmed that there are large deposits of water ice at both the moon's north and south poles.
How did they know the ice was there if it was underground? That's what you said, right?
Good question. They know because they found indirect evidence in the form of hydrogen.
What do you mean by that?
What I mean is that instruments on the spacecraft detected hydrogen. Hydrogen, as you know, combines with oxygen to form water, the chemical formula being H2O, for two hydrogen atoms joining an oxygen atom, with water being the result. The instruments on Lunar Prospector could not detect H2O, but it could say if there was or wasn't any hydrogen present. And what the instruments showed was lots of hydrogen, enough for perhaps trillions of tons of water ice. But the scientists, being scientists, were not satisfied with indirect evidence. So guess what they did next?
They got samples of ice to bring back?
That would be ideal, but at present it's too expensive and difficult. They had a simpler solution. When Lunar Prospector was ending its lifetime, the scientists crashed it into one of the craters where ice was expected to be located. They had hoped that the crash would cause water vapor to be released. If that happened, they could see the water vapor with powerful telescopes, and it would give direct evidence for the presence of water ice. However, they knew the chances were very slim, less than 10%.
So, did they find the water vapor?
Unfortunately, no. They did not detect water vapor from the impact. But that does not mean that there is no water on the moon, since there are many uncertainties. For the time being, we'll just have to stay tuned and see what the scientists cook up next.
1. Based on information from the discussion, to which spacecraft does each statement relate? Place a check mark in the correct box.